That day, I flipped open a storybook. The story said that the bargain husband I picked up at the bottom of a cliff was actually the young Marquis Shui who had faked his death. 3 years after marrying me, he returned to the capital to wed his childhood sweetheart. Out of guilt, Shuizi took me as a concubine. I became the hidden ailment, the festering sore between this perfect couple. The main wife looked at me coldly. The servants made things difficult for me. I was no different from a slave later. Shuizi's old illness relapsed and worsened. I searched everywhere for herbs for him and never returned. In the end, Shuizi found my corpse at the foot of a snowy mountain, along with the snowgy grass in my arms. From then on, the Marquis of Yonging had reddened eyes, went mad, and never loved anyone again. I frowned. Should I be the only woman the Marquis of Yonging ever loved in his life, or should I just scam some money out of him? How strange. The two people in this storybook seemed so familiar. The bustling street had also become eerily quiet. I closed the booklet, pulling myself away from the bizarre world within the story, and the clamor suddenly flowed back into my ears like water. I hadn't even noticed that cold sweat had soaked through my front and back. Boss, who wrote this book, I find it quite nonsensical. The hunched old man in front of the bookstall raised his head, a dark gleam flickering in his cloudy eyes. He stroked his beard. Sensical or not, since the young lady has already finished reading it, you'll have to buy it. Fine. How much? I took out my purse. 2 taels and 3 chien. How strange. This is exactly the amount of money I got from selling herbs today. That old man's gaze made me very uncomfortable, like a snake. Here you go. I hurriedly paid and tucked the storybook in my chest, while a spark of suspicion was also planted in my heart. When I returned to the brick house, Shishan was practicing calligraphy. A few rays of sunset light gilded his silhouette with gold. Mountain folk are simple, knowledgeable about farming and hemp cultivation, yet rarely does one write as fine a hand as Shishan. He opened the storybook again to read, only to find a book without words. Those thrilling words that were originally on the paper had vanished without a trace at some point. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was seeing things. You are back. Zishan looked up and gave me a gentle smile. I nodded without saying anything, went to busy myself at the stove, and after a while brought out the meal. Tode, there was dried fish I specially bought from town. Your cooking has improved again. Zishan took a bite and casually praised, though his face showed no sign of amazement. This is ocean fish. Is it good? I probed. Not bad. This kind of fish is better suited for sashimi, exceptionally fresh and delicious. Fish was a rare treat, and he ate it with relish. 3 years ago, I picked him up and brought him home to treat his injuries. He seemed to have damaged his head from the fall, unable to remember anything, only that his home was in Chuanshu. Whether it is Chuanshu or here, both are far from the sea, so fresh sea fish is absolutely impossible to get. The way of eating fish sashimi is nothing but a mirage, mere talk on paper. Tode, he went to sleep very early. I leaned by the pillow watching his sleeping profile, and couldn't help but call out softly. Shuizi? His brows furrowed tightly. I breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe I was overthinking. I had just closed my eyes to sleep. Ching ching. I suddenly opened my eyes. The one Shishan murmured to so tenderly was not me, but the childhood sweetheart of young Marquis Shui in the storybook, Shen Wangxing. He couldn't fall asleep anymore. My alarmed gaze crawled up to Shishan's desk. It was shortly after we got married. He personally supervised the work and hired a carpenter to build it. Shishan always loved reading, so I often went to the bookstalls in town for him. The small town was remote, and the books I bought were often patchwork with many missing parts. Unfortunately, I didn't understand, yet still presented them to him to claim credit. Shishan just looked at me, shaking his head with a smile. He often bent over his desk reading for long hours, either copying or writing. I didn't care for brush and ink, so I never paid much attention. Occasionally, when I glanced over, he was writing landscape poetry, so I never looked again. I never knew that this ordinary desk I faced day after day actually had a hidden compartment. With a snap, a small box fell out. I opened it, and inside was a thick stack of unsent letters, each one headed with, "To my dearest Ching Ching, may these words be as if we meet." For 3 years, your heart longed for Shen Wanqing, yet you had to be intimate with me, Shui Zi. It must have been hard keeping up that act. So on our wedding day, the flickering red candles were hazy. You couldn't see the spring scenery, and could only swallow Shen Wanqing's name with great difficulty. I ran out the door and sat on a small hill to get some air. The moonlight was so cold. That storybook was like a nightmare to me. No matter how absurd it seemed, I had no choice but to believe it. Now my Shishan wasn't Shishan. He was Shui Zi. What do I do now? Am I supposed to die for him like in the storybook? At this thought, my body actually trembled, so I was afraid after all. I make my living gathering herbs. I've climbed steep cliffs and walked along sheer precipices, but I've never been this scared. Is that uncertain future really set in stone? My mother used to say that if you speak a nightmare aloud, it won't come true. Seeing that storybook was like poking a hole through a nightmare. No. Though I love Shishan, I don't love Shui Zi, and I certainly won't trample my dignity or throw away my life for him. I went back to the room, lay back in bed, and closed my eyes as if nothing had happened. Half asleep, Shishan reached out his long arm to pull me into his embrace. I dodged. I really was afraid he'd be holding the wrong person. Days rolled by like wheels for another 10 days. I remained distant toward Shishan, and he went from initial confusion to eventual silence. Perhaps he finally sensed something, or perhaps the Xue family really couldn't wait any longer. The day of reckoning came a full month earlier than in the storybook. See, that storybook wasn't some ironclad law, some life and death register set in stone. It could actually be changed by human effort. That day, I had just returned to the small courtyard with my medicine basket on my back when I sensed something was off. A faint fragrance seemed to drift through the air. I pushed open the door and saw that the round table and short stools in the main hall had been moved aside, replaced by 48 immortals' chairs that came from who knows where. An elderly couple in fine clothing sat in the middle. A young woman in a pink dress and veiled hat sat on the left, and on the right sat Shishan. No, I should call him Shui Zi now. 3 gazes shot toward me in unison. I couldn't help but take a step back. Anyone who didn't know better would think this was some kind of court interrogation. Seemingly embarrassed and flustered, Shui Zi didn't dare look at me, but I fixed my gaze on him like nails. I didn't need to ask who these people were, obviously his parents, and his perfect match Shen Wanqing. I only asked him, where did my mint leaves go? The main hall had excellent lighting, so I often dried herbs here. Before leaving today, I had specifically laid out several bamboo trays of mint leaves to dry, planning to steep them in water for a refreshing summer drink. Now, those bamboo trays had all vanished into thin air. Shui Zi didn't expect me to ask about the mint first. He was slightly stunned, then slowly spoke. "Qingdai, don't rush. I have important matters to discuss with you. These two are—" I interrupted him impatiently. "Zheishan, I am asking you, where are my mint leaves? Or should I call you Shui Zi?" His breath hitched, and after a pause, "So you've found out." Perhaps displeased that we were locked in each other's gaze, Shen Wanqing couldn't help but interject. "Miss Qingdai, it was I who tidied up the clearing earlier to set up chairs and moved your mint leaves aside." Following her somewhat evasive gaze toward the door, I saw my mint leaves scattered all over the haystack in the courtyard. I lowered my head. Barging into someone else's home like this and messing with their belongings is hardly proper etiquette for people of status. The elderly couple at the head seats, who had been maintaining their composure, finally showed some stiffness in their expressions. Shen Wanqing still spoke in an even tone. It was just to make some room and tidy up a place to rest. "If there was any offense, I apologize to you, miss." I looked around 4 people, 4 chairs, yet I alone stood off to the side. I turned to Shui Zi. "Say what you want to say." Shui Zi picked up the teacup, took a sip, and said slowly, "Qingdai, I am sorry. I am not Shishan. I am Shui Zi. 3 years ago, I went on a campaign with the false king. I thought we could return triumphantly after winning the battle, but on our way back to the capital, The false king betrayed us and pushed me off a cliff. Fortunately, you saved me, and I survived. Miss, I chewed on this somewhat awkward way he addressed me, and couldn't help but smile bitterly. I am not good at getting close to people. Even after we got married, I was clumsy and tongue tied around him. Yet he called me a die so naturally, clinging to me day after day, impossible to shake off. Now he is calling me Miss. I wanted to return to the capital once I recovered. Shuizi paused. But with the false king in power, I was afraid if he found out I wasn't dead, it would implicate my family. So I closed my eyes and continued his words. So you pretended to have lost your memory and married me. Memories of the past flowed through my mind. Shuizi lowered his eyes. Miss, you are kind-hearted. I will never forget the grace of saving my life. I still stood alone in the center of the hall. His parents looked at me with an indescribable distance and indifference. They must be tired. After 3 years apart from their son, when they finally reunited, they had to face an outsider like me. It is not just because I am kind. I tilted my head, catching his evasive gaze. You know I grew up eating meals from 100 families, and I am an herb-gathering girl. The officials and gentry in town all give me some face. These 3 years, the people checking household registrations have never given you trouble. There is nowhere more suitable for hiding your identity than here, right? Shuizi raised his head again, suddenly showing anger. Qingdai, how could you think of me like this? Don't you know that half a year ago, when the false king was executed, I had already resumed correspondence with my family. I could have returned early, if not for thinking of you. I sneered coldly. What difference does one day earlier or later make? Shuizi's mother, who had been holding back for a while, finally spoke up. Miss, these past few years we've been so grateful for all your running around taking care of things. Her gaze lingered lovingly on the unharmed Shuizi, then shifted to Shen Wangqing, who stood awkwardly to the side. This is Miss Shen. She has had a marriage engagement with our Shuizi since childhood. We'll be departing for the capital soon. Miss Shen has waited bitterly for Zir for 3 years. It is time she got her due. I stared at her steadily, not saying a word. What about my 3 years, then? What do I get? Madame Shui's tone remained unhurried. We've seen how Zir has wronged you, miss. We truly don't know how to make it up to you. Upon hearing this, Shuizi stood up and bowed to Madame Shui. Mother, your son has decided to take Qingdai as a concubine to enter the household together with Miss Shen. With that said, he cupped his hands again toward Shen Wangqing. I hope Miss Shen will forgive me. Madame Shui furrowed her brow but said nothing. Shen Wangqing lifted her veiled hat, revealing her pale face. She murmured, but in the end still said, The young Marquis repays kindness with gratitude. Qing is very grateful to marry such a man. Father Shui, who had been silent all along, let out a cold snort and tugged at his beard. Taking a concubine also has its rules. Without the parents' blessing, what kind of marriage is this? Shuizi bent his waist even lower. Qingdai, she, has no father or mother. A pang of bitterness struck my heart. So he also knew I had no father or mother, no one to rely on. Then summon the clan elder. Father Shui waved his hand impatiently. I turned to look at the man standing beside me. Beneath his coarse cloth shirt, his figure stood tall like bamboo. The mud of the mountain wilds could not touch him. So the elegant young lord already had a fine match, and a small plant of Qingdai grown in the mountain forest. How could she mistakenly entrust herself to him? The young lord takes a concubine. His parents nod in approval. His wife shows forgiveness. What a wonderful tale. Such a romantic affair. Only no one asked me Qingdai. I have no clansmen, so where would a clan elder come from? The neighbors in this small village are my family. It was kind of Shuizi to still remember Liu the Benevolent, who witnessed our marriage. The great benefactor was over 70 years old, shaking his head while stroking his beard, mumbling incoherently. Even as Shen Wangqing offered him a seat and spoke to him politely at length, it was unclear whether he understood or not. Shuizi's brow furrowed tighter and tighter until he finally squeezed out a smile and half squatted in front of the downcast benefactor. Benefactor, do you still remember me? The great benefactor's eyes suddenly lit up, and he chuckled. Shan! That name made all those nobles shudder. I let out a cold sneer so they couldn't bear to hear this name after all. Shuizi dropped his smile and said solemnly, Benefactor, I am not Shan, I am Shuizi. Shuizi pointed to the seat of honor. These are my parents. They've come to find me. I am going to take Qingdai back with me and make her my concubine. The great benefactor shook his head, still smiling. That won't do. Degrading a wife to a concubine, how can that be right? That word degrading made Shuizi's parents turn their heads away. Me fists clenched involuntarily. I wondered if Shuizi would still acknowledge that I was once his wife. Shuizi also lowered his head and only slowly raised it after a long while, his expression much softer. I know I've wronged Qingdai, but the gap between our statuses is too great. I've long had a marriage arrangement, and even if I wanted to elevate her, I couldn't give Qingdai the title of wife. The great benefactor suddenly let out a cold laugh and shook his head again. And just what status do you have? This question made Shuizi too embarrassed to speak. The so-called heir of the Yongning Marquis manor was actually just a commoner without rank. Father Shui grew impatient and couldn't listen anymore, patting the armrest of the 8 Immortals' chair. My son just earned military merit right as the new emperor ascends the throne. Father Shui cupped his hands toward the distance to show respect. Becoming a high official in the future is naturally a given. How can marriage not be between families of equal standing? Oh, the great philanthropist finally smoothed out his beard, nodding repeatedly. That makes sense. That makes sense. However, changing the subject, the great philanthropist seemed to be pondering something. He pursed his lips before speaking. I am afraid this would bring the reputation of being heartless and ungrateful. The bad name of being an ingrate. The great philanthropist's booming laughter echoed in my small hall, but I clearly heard Shuizi sharply inhale. Becoming a high official once branded with the reputation of being an ingrate, his career would come to a halt. Shuizi looked at me as if seeking help, but I naturally averted my eyes and didn't look at him. The great philanthropist waved his hand and stood up to leave. This young man is willing to give Qingdai the title of honored concubine. Shuizi gritted his teeth and bowed again, stopping the great philanthropist in his tracks. I just laughed until tears came out, but my heart felt as satisfying as if something had been smashed to pieces. The great philanthropist just laughed, just shook his head, and walked away. Please stay, philanthropist. I smiled and stopped the great philanthropist. Shuizi's eyes, which had just dimmed, lit up again. The philanthropist's gaze on me was uncertain. Qingdai, have you thought it through? I nodded. I've thought it through. Looking around at everyone, I smiled brightly. 3 years of care and nursing, plus hush money, charging you 2,000 taels of silver isn't unreasonable, right? The philanthropist's stiff face suddenly flushed with color. He patted his chest, seeming confident. That is wonderful. This old man can be a witness today. 3 years of marital affection in Qingdai's heart. Is it less important than money? Shuizi hung his hands at his sides, smiling bitterly and dejectedly, actually putting on an appearance of being hurt and betrayed. The old Shui couple's expressions were displeased. Shen Wanqing took a deep breath, her vermilion lips parting slightly. Miss Qingdai, I originally thought you two had feelings for each other. Even though your background is unclear, taking you into the mansion as a concubine would be acceptable. If you won't agree, giving you some compensation would also be proper. But you open your mouth asking for 2,000 taels of silver. Isn't that extortion? The philanthropist took a sip of the tea I poured, clearing his throat. Fair enough, fair enough. Qingdai, go to town and invite Scholar Wu, list out the items clearly. That way, it'll be proper to. He quickly glanced up and down at Shuizi, settle the payment and be done with it. Scholar Wu's abacus clattered away noisily. The philanthropist still had his eyes closed, resting, smiling contentedly. Shui family's parents didn't expect me to actually calculate the money item by item. Their faces grew even darker. Although so many people were sitting in the small hall, it was terrifyingly quiet. I looked around, my gaze resting on Shuizi's face as he half leaned against the chair, holding a teacup in contemplation. At this moment, my eyes were exceptionally soft. Shuizi, stand up. Shuizi stood up in confusion, a slight movement in his eyes. Qingdai, have you changed your mind? Number, I gave him a gentle push. Move aside. I quickly slipped into his seat and sat down properly. This 8 immortals chair was really stable. Father Shui snorted through his nose, his displeasure obvious. How uncouth. I glanced at him without backing down. Uncle came uninvited. That is rude. Not knowing to offer your seat to the host, that is rude. As for sitting in the master's seat without being offered one, that is simply lacking upbringing. I stressed the words lacking upbringing heavily. Father Shui clenched his fist and slammed it hard on the armrest. Shui Zi was even more furious. Qingdai, when did you become so ignorant of propriety? I sneered a few times and retorted, you people were the ones lacking manners first. Besides, you are right, I really don't know how much more noble you people are compared to me. Shen Wangqing's face grew paler and paler, as if she was about to faint any moment. Miss Qingdai, please don't get angry. Uncle and aunt are getting on in years. They can't stand for long. I stared at her with a look of slight disgust. Her waist was so slender, her face no bigger than a palm, and the moment she spoke it was all soft and gentle words. Who could imagine she would be as cold and sinister as in that storybook? It turned out that once I married into the Marquis's mansion, she would force contraceptive soup down my throat. Even when Shuizi flew into a rage, she would just cry, and Shuizi would hold her and sigh deeply. Ching ching, the moment you shed tears, my heart softens. That little booklet was so thin, yet it turned out to be my worthless life. I was the background, the foil, the stain Shuizi wanted to erase until I died. Until I died. The black characters seemed to fly out from that thin storybook, wrapping tightly around me. They're elderly, but what about you, Miss Shen? I sneered. Weren't you also sitting quite comfortably just now? Shen Wanqing moved her lips, wanting to explain something, but I quickly raised my hand to stop her. There is one more thing I should remind you of, Miss Shen. After all, you haven't married into the family yet. Following the Marquis's people here to find Shuizi isn't quite appropriate, is it? If word gets out, where would the minister put his face? How do you know my father is a minister? Shen Wangqing trembled all over and couldn't help walking toward me. She got closer and closer, and I couldn't help but feel afraid. I remembered the sinister-looking Shen Wangqing from the storybook, who once even used a nightmare as an excuse and nearly strangled me to death. I could clearly see her teeth chattering non-stop. Just as I didn't know how to answer her, the great benefactor stroked his beard again. Ah, as the Book of Rites says, a betrothed woman becomes a wife, one who elopes becomes a concubine. The great benefactor smiled at Shuizi, his face full of kindness. It seems the young master has found a candidate for his esteemed concubine. A flash of resentment passed through Shen Wangqing's eyes. I laughed to myself. Must be hard holding it in, huh? Scholar Wu's abacus sounds finally stopped. He picked up the calculation paper beside him and began reading out the items, thoughtfully explaining each one in detail. As the saying goes, saving a life is better than building a 7-story pagoda. Saving such a distinguished person, charging 700 taels is of course fair and square. His face was full of smiles as he winked at Shuizi. In ancient times, Shenong tasted 100 herbs. Now we have Miss Qingdai, who can identify 1,000 medicines. The two masters may not know, but our Miss Qingdai is a famous apothecary within 500 li. The herbs she gathers are all official grade. Scholar Wu raised his eyebrows high. I couldn't help feeling a bit guilty. Actually, I've only brewed medicine for the county magistrate a few times. We can't compare with the imperial physicians in the capital. Those imperial physicians charge at least 10 taels of silver for a prescription. Miss Qingdai has brewed over 100 doses for the young master over these years. Let's just calculate it at 5 taels of silver per dose. The philanthropist seemed to suddenly come to his senses. Ah, Scholar Wu, you are too modest. How can Qingdai not compare to an imperial physician? Let's settle on 10 taels. Scholar Wu winked at the philanthropist again and mouthed something silently. Too much. The philanthropist immediately closed his eyes. Fine then, 5 taels it is. Let's just say Qingdai has a benevolent heart as a healer, saving the world with her medicine. Scholar Wu cleared his throat and continued, Every grain on the plate comes from hard toil. Your household's cook earns about 5 taels of silver a month, and calculating for a full 3 years, that is 180 taels. I rubbed my forehead. As expected of Scholar Wu, his calculations were indeed thorough and meticulous. Then there was 300 taels for nursing care, and 200 taels for clothing expenses. Shuizi frowned. That is only over 1,800. Scholar Wu gave a dry laugh and scratched his head. My lord, I am not just making up numbers. There is one more expense I haven't included, but over these 3 years, 2,000 taels won't be enough. Shuizi's mother glanced at him sideways. What else do we owe you? For 2.5 of these 3 years, your young master was, Scholar Wu paused, was a fugitive with his life at risk. If the matter had been exposed, Qingdai would have lost her life too. The price of that risk is worth far more than 200 taels. Shuizi's parents remained silent. Shuizi was also deep in thought. I don't know how long passed, but perhaps his conscience kicked in, and Shuizi actually relented. Fine, Qingdai, since you want money, I'll give you 2,000 taels. I was stunned for a moment that easy. But I can't sign a divorce letter for you because my parents never knew about this marriage and we never registered it at the government office, so we can't be considered husband and wife. On the dark bed at night, I tossed and turned. This once warm little house now only had me left in it, yet I had no time to grieve over Shishan's departure, because I didn't believe it. In the storybook, Shuizi was extremely shrewd. He was never that jade-faced gentleman Shishan, but an ambitious god of slaughter. Not long after entering the court, he quickly carved out a place for himself through ruthless tactics. Amid political strife and power struggles, he always managed to emerge unscathed, seemingly untouched by dust, but in truth, born from blood. I asked him for such an amount for 2 reasons. First, I was unwilling to let it go rather than swallowing this grievance. I might as well get something for myself. Second, I wanted Shuizi to know that I only loved money, and for money I would keep my mouth shut. Only then could I secure peace for myself and the villagers. My heart was pounding in chaos. Even though I already knew that storybook had become a wordless heavenly book, I still got up to flip through it, hoping to find some clues. I didn't want to turn to the first page, but on the fly page that had turned snow white, there seemed to be faint, shadowy writing. The blurry words became clearer and clearer. As I rapidly flipped through, my mind raced. I had to memorize them all. My eyelids twitched as fast as my heartbeat. Last time we told how that Shishan suddenly transformed into a high-ranking official. Qingdai was puzzled in her heart. He deceived me, so tricked me into giving myself to him, truly detestable. A thought arose. Why not demand some silver to quell the anger in my heart? Thus she invited Liu, the benefactor, as witness, and entrusted Scholar Wu to list out the demanded items of wealth, sprawling and extensive, amounting to as much as 2,000 taels next page. That Shuizi pretended to give the money, but in his heart he was furious. Threatening me like this, when I am made a king or prime minister some day, what kind of good woman couldn't I have? He also secretly pondered, if this person is left to spread rumors everywhere, it will eventually become a disaster. Better to placate her for now, and in the future I must take her life to eliminate future troubles. After thinking it over several times, he then considered how the noble daughter of the Shen family was deeply devoted. The minister had originally chosen a good match for his beloved daughter, but fortunately, with the help of her maidservant, she secretly left home and came running to me. This marriage, even if the minister is unwilling, is already set in stone. Lost in these self-satisfied thoughts, he grew drowsy and eventually met the Duke of Zhou. As I refused to become a concubine, the plot changed direction, and the storybook actually changed too. He really intended to kill me. I long stopped hoping Shuizi would show me mercy, but I never expected him to be this cruel. This is fine. This is fine. I tucked the storybook under my pillow this way I can counter his moves as they come. Resting my head on the storybook, my mind was in turmoil. What should I do next? Since I have money now, why not bid farewell to benefactor Liu tomorrow and flee for my life? My hand reached under the pillow, fingers tracing the curled, frayed edges of the storybook. Far from feeling at ease, I grew even more anxious. Even if I escaped, it would generate new content. As long as this storybook exists, my entanglement with Shuizi will never end. How can I destroy it? The thought crossed my mind. At that moment, my fingertips suddenly felt a burning sensation. The storybook was heating up, as if it were furious. I immediately changed my thoughts. I had borrowed its power to change my fate. How could I destroy my own advantage? The storybook calmed down again, as if nothing unusual had happened. I reconsidered. Since the storybook cannot be destroyed, and destroying it might not even be a good thing, how can I end this play? All the stories revolve around Shuizi and me, if I want to end it. Unless a chill ran through my heart, that is it. Just like the earliest version I had seen, the storybook's content came to an abrupt end after my death. Shuizi had already committed countless evils and was no longer the image of a refined gentleman. This storybook was no longer a cliché tale of talented scholars and beautiful ladies, but had become a novel of worldly affairs. Such novels often end with villains being punished, demonstrating divine justice. My death, or your imprisonment. Shuizi, is there even a choice? I murmured as I closed my eyes. The minister, no way. Wushukai behind the counter set down his abacus, shaking his head vigorously as he tried to dissuade me. Miss Qingdai, you've already taken so much money, just let it go. Why stir up more trouble? Besides, we're just common folk even if the letter actually reaches the minister. Would he even read it? You don't understand. This matter won't just end like this. I paced back and forth anxiously in the pawn shop. Wushukai let out a long sigh and flicked a few more beads on his abacus. The Shui family has all returned to the capital. What are you still worried about? I bit my lip hard, unable to utter a word. Though this place was far from the capital, I couldn't afford to waste any time. The young shop assistant sweeping nearby suddenly let out a chuckle. If Miss wants to send a letter to the minister, well, there is a way. Wu Shukai rolled his eyes and casually grabbed a brush to throw at him. Keep your lousy ideas to yourself. The young assistant was only 13 or 14, just grinning. With a nimble dodge, he evaded Wu Shukai's flying dart. I was already at my wit's end with no other options, so I had no choice but to ask him, "What is your idea?" when he heard me ask. He suddenly became shy, glancing at me before looking away, opening his mouth for a long while before finally speaking. The inspector who came from above has been in the city for almost half a month now, with strange rashes on his face and body that won't heal, so he can't see anyone. They've posted notices everywhere. Even in our county sister Qingdai, if you meet the inspector, wouldn't that bring you closer to the minister? Not bad. I immediately pulled out a silver ingot and gave it to him. Once this matter is settled, I'll have more to thank you for, sister. The young helper immediately tossed his broom aside and ran off happily with the silver tucked away. Scholar Wu frowned. However, Qingdai, the inspector isn't someone you can just see whenever you want. Even if you are skilled in medicine, officials trust renowned physicians more. I nodded, knowing full well. Don't forget, I also have money. Money makes even ghosts turn the millstone. When the inspector saw me, I was dressed in a black man's robe. Never having worn such expensive clothing before, I tried my best to hide my awkwardness. Though I was prepared, I still got a fright when the screen was moved aside. The inspector's exposed face and neck were densely covered with red spots. "My lord, might you have eaten something you shouldn't have?" The attendant standing nearby sneered. If our lord knew, why would he post notices? Sweat dripped from my forehead. Renowned physicians must have examined him, and all knew it was an allergic reaction. But without removing the source, it would be difficult to treat. There seemed to be a sweet fragrance of pear in the air. The scent was remarkably strong. I looked up and saw a plate of pears on the desk, while the fragrance from the incense burner grew even stronger. Our Lord loves pears the most. The attendant seemed to see through my thoughts. I recalled that a villager had once gotten this kind of rash, and he too loved eating pears. So I gathered my courage and spoke up clearly. Forgive this humble woman's poor eyesight, but these yellowish little fruits don't look like pears. The attendant sneered. Take a good look. If these aren't pears, then what are they? With that, he irritably brought the plate of pears before me. Seeing that plate of fruit, I breathed a sigh of relief, just as I thought. These are definitely not pears. Just a local variety of small fruit. They're not common, and they're also poisonous. If eaten in excess, one will break out in rashes all over. This ailment mostly occurs in children. So many physicians overlook it. This humble woman has tasted all kinds of herbs, so I am familiar with it. I glanced at the incense burner. If heated to release the fragrance like this, inhaling it will also cause throat swelling and difficulty breathing. The attendant gave me an inscrutable look, then waved for someone to carry out the incense burner and also remove the pears. No one gave me instructions, so I stood in place, not daring to move an inch. The governor also kept his head lowered, not saying a word. Gradually, my back became drenched in sweat. After about the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, the governor suddenly coughed once and laughed. Indeed, a miracle healer. It turns out this official's fondness for pears and greedy appetite caused the trouble. I made a cupped fist salute. What reward does the lady herbalist desire? I lifted my head, eyes bright and piercing. This commoner dreamed of a black dragon last night, rising from a deep pool. Its scales were like dark clouds, blocking out the sky and sun. It told me, I am the dragon-riding son-in-law, destined to cover the sky with one hand. Insolent. The governor's smile suddenly turned cold. Who exactly are you referring to? I swallowed a breath, steadying my nerves. This commoner also dreamed of a person who claimed to be the daughter of the Minister of Revenue, bewitched by an evil creature and married to a villain. The minister's daughter eloping, what a scandal that would be, surely covered up completely. But news of the chaos in the minister's household must be known throughout the court. The governor didn't respond for a moment. Listening to his heavy breathing, I dug my nails deep into my palms. After a long while, the governor's voice turned stern. What exactly do you want? I paused for a moment, then answered slowly. I ask your excellency to pass a message to the minister, simply saying that his daughter is in the Marquis of Yonging's carriage. Even the governor's hands trembled. This is a grave matter. Is this true? I nodded. The reason the minister still wanted to marry his daughter to Shuizi was nothing more than to protect her reputation. Now I would throw Shen Wangqing's name heavily to the ground, making it known to everyone, forcing the minister to openly oppose Shuizi, a veteran minister who had served 2 emperors versus the young Marquis Shui, who had disappeared for 3 years. Which side their colleagues would choose was obvious. The governor gave me no response, but I knew he would definitely do the minister this favor. Within half a month, children were clapping and chanting in every street and alley. The black dragon wants to marry the minister's daughter. One wag of his tail, and he'll be emperor. Li Linfu Wei Zhongxian. Neither compares to Marquis Shui's power reaching the heavens. I hid at home for a few days, keeping an eye on the changes in that storybook. But the storybook only recorded my actions. The next page I cared about most was still a quiet blank. Shuizi, what will you do next? Once this matter came out, it indeed caused a huge uproar. Who in the capital didn't know? The Minister of Revenue stopped the Yongning Marquis's carriage and slapped young Marquis Shui hard across the face. Some said the Minister of Revenue's beloved daughter was also sitting in that carriage. One day, as I was staring at the storybook, I saw writing appearing. I grabbed the storybook trying to see clearly, but the door was suddenly broken open. In my panic, I stuffed the storybook against my chest, and a group of officers grabbed me and shoved me into a carriage. Sitting in the carriage was a tall, thin man with a pale, beardless face. He wore a red official robe and glanced at me with phoenix eyes. "Don't be afraid, miss. No one wants your life. We're just taking you to the capital." I swallowed back the cry for help in my mouth. "Do you know Shuizi?" I was startled and lied that I didn't. He smiled. "How strange. He sent someone to kill you, yet you say you don't know him." I gradually came back to my senses. "I am still alive and well?" The man curled his lips into a smile, his voice gentle yet eerie. "Then you'd better thank Minister properly for saving your life. You wouldn't repay kindness with ingratitude, would you?" I nodded. Of course. Passing by a chicken coop, he seemed displeased with the smell here, raising his orchid fingers to cover his nose. He spoke in a muffled voice. "Our hearts are aligned. We both want Shuizi dead. As for where Miss goes, we don't care, nor do we want to, understood?" I nodded desperately. "Better you die than me. Miss Shen has never left the capital." It was young Master Shui who played Chen Shaimei and wasn't satisfied, wanting to climb higher branches. He deliberately tarnished her reputation, stirring up a citywide scandal to force Minister into submission. This shows his wolf's heart and dog's lungs, harboring treasonous intentions. I nodded again and again. Yes. After staring at me for a long time, he finally let out a cold snort. "If it weren't for the old madam being a devout Buddhist and saying you were pitiful, I would have gone to hell together with Shuizi." The stone in my heart finally dropped, but my face remained cautious and timid, my voice as faint as a mosquito. "Sorry. You don't need to play nice." He turned his head away in disgust. "In a few days at the court hearing, if you say the wrong thing, your life will still be forfeit." I stayed silent. How could I possibly say the wrong thing? At the minister's residence, I knelt on the ground, recounting to the minister every detail of my 3 years with Shishan. The minister listened, took a sip of tea, showing neither joy nor anger. "When did you find out that Shishan was Shuizi?" I immediately kowtowed. This commoner woman only found out after meeting the Shui family's parents. "You wench!" Shuizi flicked his sleeve, sweeping the teacup to the ground. "You clearly knew all along. You even fed me sea fish to test me." I laughed inwardly, Shuizi. "So you too have a day when you can't keep your composure." The minister made a gesture to calm Shuizi. "Young man, stay calm. Don't be hasty." Then he suddenly showed a kindly expression and spoke gently to me. "Your husband abandoned you and left. Are you willing to accept that?" I suddenly dabbed my tears with a handkerchief, crying, "This commoner woman is so lowly. I was willing to lower myself to be a concubine, only wishing to stay by my husband's side. But Master Shui said I was too coarse and vulgar and cast me aside." Shuizi was so angry his veins bulged, and he immediately jumped up. "It was clearly you who played hard to get and acted all high and mighty, and even demanded 2,000 taels of silver from me." The minister immediately pressed in a cold voice, "Is there such a thing?" I opened my mouth, just about to explain, when Shuizi beat me to it. "Of course. I even had Liu, the great philanthropist from their village, as a witness." The minister clapped his hands. "Bring the person up." I was immediately filled with worry. The journey to the capital was so long, could the great philanthropist's frail body withstand the bumping of the carriage? Had he been tortured? But when I saw him, my heart relaxed a little. He was supported out by 2 maids, still smiling, looking fairly hale. The philanthropist was about to kneel, but the minister waved it off. "Young Marquis Shui gave Miss Qingdai 2,000 taels as severance. Is this true?" The philanthropist hemmed and hawed for a long while, waving his hands repeatedly. "That can't be true at all." I sighed inwardly. The philanthropist was far more practiced at lying than I was. Qingdai did ask for some wife dismissal fee, but the young Marquis didn't pay it. The philanthropist slapped his forehead. Shuizi's eyes nearly split open with rage. "You dare deny it?" The philanthropist looked at Shuizi, bending his posture slightly, still smiling. "Not annoyed at all. Please calm down, young Marquis. You yourself said this wife title was neither proper nor justified first. never registered in records. Second, never had parents' blessing. How could there be compensation? Shuizi turned to report to the minister. Whether there is money or not, a search will tell. The pale, beardless man from the carriage stood beside the minister, his tone measured and rhythmic. This servant searched thoroughly, only found 10 taels of silver. I knew that stack of banknotes was sitting right there in the secret compartment of the desk Shuizi himself had set up. The secret compartment, Shuizi suddenly realized. It is in my desk's secret compartment. It must be there, along with all the letters I've written to Qing Qing over the years. It would have been better if he hadn't mentioned Shen Wenqing, but once he did, the minister's anger flared from all directions. The minister suddenly smashed the teacup hard onto the table. You still claim to have lost your memory. You were clearly conscious the whole time, and even knew to make a secret compartment in the desk. You obviously deceived us into marriage first, then disregarded the grace of having your life saved, heartless and ungrateful, abandoning your wife who shared your hardships, and now you still want to seduce my daughter. Shuizi was startled and hurriedly knelt on the ground, crying out that he was wronged. The minister was breathing heavily, his face flushed red. The pale, beardless man immediately asked me, "When the Shui family came, was there a young woman with them?" I quickly shook my head. There wasn't only Shui's parents, a young servant, and a nanny who looked after Madame Shui. Shuizi seemed to finally recognize the situation and simply said nothing more. The minister nodded. "Shuizi, you have some nerve, still daring to falsely accuse my daughter. Wangqing was merely ill for a little over a month, and all the servants in the manor can testify to that." "Did you record it all, eunuch?" the minister asked the pale, beardless man, who nodded and rolled up the record of this interrogation and wrapped it up. "This servant will take it to the Ministry of Justice and see what they say." The beardless man cupped his hands in salute. Even though Shuizi was unwilling, he was forced down and made to press his seal. I also left my fingerprint. The beardless man took his leave. Before going, he winked at me, and I knew that paper would certainly not mention my 2,000 taels of silver. The minister let out a long breath, seeming quite pleased. "Young Marquis Shui, take care. I won't see you out. As for you two, once the court's verdict comes down, this official will personally escort you back to your hometown. Thank you for proving my daughter's innocence." Amidst the benefactors, not at all, I finally felt a wave of relief. On the day Shuizi was exiled to the northern frontier, the minister specially permitted me to see him off. In the prison cell, Shuizi sat on the ground with shackles on his feet, legs spread apart. The look in his eyes as he watched me was as sinister as a wolf's. I was certain that if not for the iron bars blocking him, he would have torn me to pieces. He suddenly smiled eerily and gently, looking exactly like Shishan. Shishan was actually a name he gave himself. He said, "Since I relied on the mountain for a living, from then on he would be my mountain to rely on." Is my wife satisfied seeing her husband fallen to such a state? I am not here to kick you while you are down. I squatted in front of him, took out the storybook and flipped to the last page to show him. That is right, the last page. At first Shuizi was disdainful, but once he saw clearly what was in the storybook, he immediately went crazy. "Where did you get this cursed book?" I naturally dodged, not letting him snatch it. I couldn't help but laugh. "Shuizi, look, it is finished."